Alright, welcome back. Day 2. Let's go. Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through a crack in the curtains. I don't see any curtains. Maybe the rain had died down a tiny bit since the previous night. But the thick rain clouds didn't seem like they'd be letting any trace of the morning sun get by. The morning was dim and far from refreshing. Same. It seems it will last all day after all. Sorry for keeping you waiting, Genji-sama. Kanon finished checking his appearance and exited the washroom. On their normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have to suffer going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of the family conference. However, unless the typhoon passed today, the relatives' stay on this island would last until tomorrow. The horror! Kanon thought it best to be prepared for the special schedule to last an extra day. The two of them left the guest house, opening their umbrellas. The rose garden had been devastated by the wind and rain on the previous night. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Kanon sighed. The two headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Golda and prepare breakfast. Golda was such a perfectionist that he had probably already woken up and was probably already preparing a breakfast as exquisite and elegant as glasswork. That is a strange metaphor. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Ushiromiya family mansion was the only thing on Rokkenjima, so in the past, they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsuhi had ordered that the mansion be locked up from midnight to early morning. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of the servants' morning shift. This task had been given to Genji and Kanon so that Golda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen in the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was still asleep. Well then, let us begin the morning chores. Yes, sir. The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. I still don't see any curtains. If the curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain enveloped in faint darkness, as though it was still trapped in the previous night. Dun dun! Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Kanon went around the mansion, opening the curtains for one window after another, without having to retrace his steps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed in front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Golda's prized cooking. Good morning. Question mark? He tried to greet Golda, who had been getting breakfast ready, but Golda was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, but the fan wasn't even running. It was still cold, without any trace of a fire being lit, so of course there were no signs of breakfast being made either. The actual horror. Though it would have been inexcusable, perhaps Golda had overslept. Ooh, is Golda the first victim? Even servants are only human. Know their furniture. They sometimes sleep in and show up late. Know their furniture. In the rare case that such a thing happens, it's part of a servant's code to hide the unsightly scene before anyone notices, smoothly cover it up, and make sure the family never even realizes that anything has gone wrong. Kanon took the receiver of the phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number for the extension line in the servant's sleeping room. Whew, long sentence. Question mark? He couldn't hear that characteristic sound of a dial tone. Canon tried picking up the receiver again, but even so, he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. That's what you just said. He tried dialing again, but it had no apparent effect. Indeed, could the lightning last night have damaged some machine, breaking the extension line? The equipment in this mansion was all worn out. Canon fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. They have that much money and they can't fix a phone? He gave up trying to wake Goda with the phone and dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily staring up at the ceiling? That vague sense of awakening was part of Natsuhi's usual morning experience. She always slept lightly, and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. To Natsuhi, sleep was definitely not a happy thing. Oh, I feel you there. When she looked outside, she saw that it was still pouring. If she hadn't sensed the tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought that it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guests. Urging herself on, she raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. No one would torment her as long as she remained inside this room. Hey, curtains finally! And her headache wouldn't get any worse here. This room was the only place she could find peace. So when she left, it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. Pretty sure they're trying to stab each other in the front. In that case, wouldn't it be better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Natsuhi's face. She was starting to sound like Kinzo. Though she often complained about Kinzo staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend everyone else, the truth was that she longed to do the same. Natsuhi gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening of her usual headache. When she reached for the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she had hung from it before going to sleep the previous night. It was Maria's charm, which Natsuhi had received from Jessica. Didn't Jessica say something about it having the power to repel magic, telling her to hang it from her doorknob? Maybe it was thanks to the charm that at least this room had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. As she thought this, her mood began to get a little more cheerful. I wonder if I have Jessica to thank for the little bit of peaceful sleep I managed to receive. No, you have Maria to thank. Then Natsuhi remembered. That's right. Last night I promised Jessica that I'd give her a charm of my own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsuhi opened a drawer on her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she had treasured when she was a child. Inside, there were many small objects that Natsuhi had thought were valuable at the time. From amidst those, she pulled out a red pouch. Inside was a small round mirror, about 10 centimeters across. It looked quite old, but the design on the back of the mirror was very ornate, and it felt like something with historical value. At the very least, it seemed much more authentic than the other charm, which looked like a plastic scorpion keychain. She had heard that this was a spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits. I want it, and she had been given it specially by her grandmother when her grandfather's mementos had been distributed. It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and malice in the same way it reflected light, so suddenly getting very fatal frame. Natsuhi returned the mirror to its pouch. It would probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. Just as she was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room. Yes? Good morning, madam. It is Genji. My apologies for waking you so early. I'm coming now. What is it? No servant had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made while preparing breakfast, something that would shame the household in front of their guests. Natsuhi took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever troubles she was about to hear of. When she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsuhi tentatively responded, "Good morning. Did something happen?" "My apologies. It would seem that the telephones have broken down due to the lightning last night. The extension telephone isn't working, so please forgive my coming to see you directly." The extension telephone isn't working, yet the look on her face says it all. That will be troublesome. Will it be possible to fix it? I am afraid we don't know the location of the damage. Later on, I would like to call in an expert and have him repair it. Good luck getting him on the island. Does that mean we'll be unable to have it repaired until after the typhoon passes? Then it will remain broken down for the duration of our guest's stay. Will that hamper our efforts to care for our guests? We will do all we can to ensure there are no problems. Very well. I'm counting on you to make sure we have no blunders. Natsuhi let out a small sigh of relief. She had been prepared for the worst, but damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about. Then again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. Pretty sure a leaf falling on the ground would be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. Natsuhi gave her head a light shake. Are the preparations for breakfast proceeding well? About that. As to that, we haven't been able to find Goda. The arrangements for breakfast have yet to be carried out. What did you say? Natsuhi was indignant. To her, this was a much bigger problem than the phones not working. I hear ya. And despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. The shock, the horror. Why did everything go well most of the time, and then come to something like this when the relatives were visiting? Natsuhi put her hand to her forehead and shook her head. Well, I suppose he slept in. At any rate, just see to it that someone hurries up and prepares breakfast. I don't care who. What? Natsuhi exited into the hall and turned around for a second to close the door to her room. The creepy thing she saw there silenced her completely. Nani? It was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers into a reddish-black liquid and scratched at the door around the doorknob. Oh, yeah, that's creepy. Ugh, it was probably some sort of awful prank, arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though they'd tried to force the door with bloody hands. Ooh, I like it. What sort of prank is this? How awful! I also just noticed it as I came to call you. Oh, so many problems first thing in the morning. I will clean it later. Perhaps this is a vulgar joke by one of the guests. Disgusting. Truly disgusting. Who in the world would pull such a childish and disgusting prank? Take a shot every time disgusting. Natsuhi had a pretty good idea, but of course there was no proof. So even if she pushed the issue, it would just seem as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsuhi gave the order to have it cleaned and headed off to the parlor with a squeak of her heels. When Natsuhi and Genji arrived in the parlor, Eva and Hideyoshi were already there. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Natsuhi-san. I heard Goda-san would be making us breakfast too. You heard wrong. My stomach's been getting all excited since I woke up. Wah-ha-ha-ha-ha. Yeah, about that. After all, it seems food is all you can look forward to at the head family household. Oh man, she's a bitch. Giggle, giggle. I'm pleased to see that you too are in high spirits so early in the morning, Eva-san. With a weary expression, Natsuhi returned Eva's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Man, if I had half her energy. Then Kanon jogged in. After bowing in apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told him something in a small voice. Kanon, have you still not found Goda? My apologies, madam. I went all over the inside of the mansion and the guest house, but I still haven't found him. Where in the world has he gone? At any rate, breakfast is a higher priority than finding Goda right now. See to it immediately. Yes, I hope he just makes them some toast or something. Kanon glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but was uncertain whether or not the words should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself. Madam, it is not only Goda. Ooh. Your husband, is also nowhere to be found. The dream. My husband? Yes. Even before visiting you, I went to his room to tell him that breakfast wasn't being prepared, but I did not find him there. Furthermore, he is not the only one missing. Rudolph-sama, his wife, and Rosa-sama are nowhere to be found. Oh dang, she's been busy. Not in the guest house, nor the mansion. Yes, they were not in their rooms in the guest house either. When she'd heard that Goda alone was missing, she'd assumed he had slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she'd learned that several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Could last night's family conference have continued all night, up until the present moment? If so, they might have wanted to cool their heads after being shut in a stuffy room. Going out for walks on their own through the rain. Ah yes, the dream. Walking through the rain in the middle of the night to cool my head. The part about cooling their heads really sounded like something Kraus would say. Goda had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. Goda was not a man who lost track of time. He had to understand that preparations for breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conference had continued until this very moment, with an atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to slip out. Yes, that theory would be quite convincing for Natsuhi. She remembered the illusion she'd felt that morning, as though the previous night had never ended. When she learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion, she once again took a deep, weary breath. After all, that banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on. Perhaps they are still discussing the inheritance somewhere in the garden, or maybe the beach. At any rate, if we don't call Goda back, we'll never be able to begin preparations for breakfast. So, what are you saying? Are Nii-san and the rest still continuing their discussion? She had planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Natsuhi and managed to grasp the situation. Nii-san and Rudolph sure are tough. Maybe it's just youth in Rosa's case. Just a bit after midnight, the two of us were so tired that we headed back to bed. Though I do remember that Nii-san and the rest were still having a heated discussion at that point. Men certainly are unpleasant when they get all fired up. Natsuhi snorted, her face still blank. Kanon, search outside. If you find Goda, tell him to return immediately and begin preparing breakfast. Certainly. Natsuhi-ne-san, we don't know for sure that they're outside, do we? Couldn't they also be inside Father's study? I see, that's certainly possible. I don't know what path their conversation took, but there's certainly a chance that they moved to Father's study and let him in on the discussion. I can't imagine that father would willingly let them bring such a detestable topic into his study. Yeah, same. You really think so? Well then, there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry, Genji-san and Kanon-kun, but could you search outside? It wouldn't be that strange for Nii-san to suggest they go outside for a walk to cool their heads. Even in this weather. I'll go to father's study. Who knows, they might actually be there after all. Eva-san, I couldn't ask a guest like you to exert herself so. I will go. I can also wish him a good morning while I'm at it. Oh, then I'll leave it in your hands. Though I somehow doubt he'll return your greeting. Natsuhine-san, have you always been on such good terms with father? Oh man, she's a bitch. I don't know whether you'd call it that, but I am sure I have gained his trust as the wife of the successor to the Ushiromiya family. Then I'm sure he'll at least answer you, right? I'd like to at least have breakfast with father. Do you think you could convince him to come down and join us? It seems that he thoroughly despises the rest of us, but I'm sure he'll listen to you, if he trusts you that much. After speaking so boldly, if you're unable to convince father to come down alone, then I doubt you'll ever be able to claim that you've earned his trust again. Giggle, giggle, giggle. Oh man. I am not confident, but I will try. Natsuhi responded, looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temperament, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. Eva was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsuhi wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to come down. But even so, Natsuhi would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible and letting Eva go instead. Eva's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsuhi clench her fists slightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder. Madam, please take this, if you would. And this is? Genji handed Natsuhi a sparkling gold key of ornate design. Ooh, it was the key to Kinzo's study. The study had an auto lock and couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbade entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door. But if this key is used, won't you also receive the blame? When the master is sleeping deeply, simply knocking on the door will not suffice. And it would be more difficult to persuade the master to leave his room if you must talk through the door. Please use this. Genji. Until now, Natsuhi had thought of Genji as a cold servant who wouldn't do anything for her since he worked directly under Kinzo. But it looked like she would have to alter her understanding of him. She wanted to communicate her gratitude, but by then, Genji had already turned his back on her and was walking down the corridor with Kanon. But as Natsuhi watched them go, the words directed at her from behind were sneering. Well then, you must bring father with you, okay? After all, it's his son's precious wife who's asking. I'm sure he'll listen to you. Giggle, giggle, giggle. We're guests, so we'll just relax here at our leisure. Quit it, Eva. You're taking this too far. Sorry, Natsuhine-san, but we're counting on you to deal with father. Without answering, Natsuhi forcefully spun around on her heels and quickly left that place. Can't blame her. After all that excitement the previous night, there was no way anyone was going to wake up early. George, Aniki, Jessica, and I were snoring loudly on the beds in the cousin room. But Maria, who had gone straight to bed without joining in, was completely awake. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the other three cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what had happened. After that, she realized that her mother wasn't with her, and she quickly got lonely. Maria left the cousin room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her and her mother. Paying no heed to the three who were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Battler mumbled and rolled over in his sleep, but it wasn't enough to wake him up. After a while, Maria returned, once again opening the door with a lively bang. Ew! When she had left the room, her face had been sleepy, but now that she was back, she looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Battler's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping on it like it was a trampoline. Ew, ew, ew! Wake up! Ew, ew, ew! What? What? Is it an enemy raid? Surround them! After making sure I was awake, Maria moved over to George Aniki's bed and started jumping on that too. In that manner, the three of us were all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening. Thanks for waking us up, Maria-chan. You stopped us from sleeping in after that late night. If only you could have been a bit more gentle about it. George Nissan, you really are an adult. I respect that. It'll be 7 soon. Well, it's not really a bad time to wake up. Yawn. Ew. Mama's not here. Ew, ew, ew. Aunt Rosa? She wasn't in her room? I wonder if she's already woken up and gone to the mansion. Not here. Ew, ew, ew. Mama. Ew, ew, ew. Maria kept groaning ooh, ooh and looking unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't where she expected. If we could just tell her where her mother was, that alone would probably calm her down. But unfortunately, we had no way of knowing where Aunt Rosa was, except that she wasn't here. Anyway, it's time for breakfast, so let's head over to the mansion. That's right. Maria, let's go to the mansion together, okay? I'm sure Aunt Rosa will be there too. Ooh, Mama's in the mansion? Then I'll go there. Ew. Yeah, guess we should go to the mansion. Our parents have probably already gone there. Maria regained her usual composure so completely, her earlier tantrum now seemed like a lie. We got dressed, left the room, and headed for the mansion. Once more there was a knocking sound on the study door, but there was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still, and I could not wake him. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Eva would probably be amused and triumphant. And even putting Eva aside, it was problematic that Kinzo had stayed shut away during this entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make an appearance. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsuhi readied herself and used the key that she'd borrowed from Genji to open the door. What's inside? Even though she was prepared for the sweet stench, which seemed to eat into one's brain as it poured out of the small crack in the door, she couldn't help but grimace. Thinking that he might still be sleeping, Natsuhi entered the room quietly. When she did, Kinzo was already awake and looking down out of the window. So you're awake. Good morning. How did you get in? Kinzo spoke with his back still facing her. His voice was not harsh but calm, and Natsuhi was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsuhi wasn't able to relax. My sincere apologies. I asked Genji-san, and he allowed me to borrow the key to the study. Oh, Genji did? If my friend thought it was that important, then I have no choice but to listen. So, what business do you have with me? Look at that dignified face. Well, breakfast will be ready soon, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would join us. I will eat here. Have it brought here like always. But father, this family conference happens only once a year. Please, at least let them see your face. Go back downstairs. Take a photo. They can see my face that way. Are you asking me to join in as they discuss how to chew up my inheritance after I die? How foolish. Let them speak of such matters as much as they please without me. And if that's what you call a family conference, it's hardly worth leaving my room for it. I am busy. Do not bother me. His last words carried the threat that any further questions would not be appreciated. Natsuhi realized that adding any further pleas would finally bring his wrath down upon her. She didn't look forward to facing Eva's sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsuhi could do. Is that so? Understood. I am sure everyone will be sorry to hear it, but I will tell them. Natsuhi decided to give up. Bowing silently, she tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. Oh look, there's today's word I've never said out loud. As she did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle, it felt like it came from an entirely different person. Natsuhi, it has been quite some time since you married into the Ushinomiya family. Yes. It has been many years since I was first permitted to bear the name Ushinomiya. Do you sometimes long for your previous family? No. Marriage means abandoning your birth family. I am Ushinomiya Natsuhi. The Ushinomiya family is the only family I can come home to, the only one I am fond of. She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt whenever she applied the Ushinomiya family name to herself. And that's precisely why she was so saddened when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushinomiya, leaving her to race about in vain. If Kraus were a woman, and you, his husband. No, I won't say that. What do you mean by that, father? Natsuhi was shocked. If Kinzo's words just now were what they seemed, it would have been more than enough to make up for all she'd suffered up until that point. Forget it. It's just the nonsense of an old man. Aww, they're having a sweet moment. And he disappeared. Kinzo once again faced away from her. He'd told her to forget it, but Natsuhi couldn't help feeling a warmth in her heart. It was a dagger sticking out of her chest. Father, even though I, Natsuhi, am not connected to you by blood, I am still your daughter. I will most assuredly see to it that your honor and glory and everything you have left behind are protected. You do not have the right to wear the one-winged eagle. However, the one-winged eagle is surely engraved in your heart. Wait, she's not allowed to wear it, but the servants are. Oh my goodness, this family. That is irrefutable proof that you are my blood relative, one who will inherit the glory of the Ushinomiya family. Some will sneer that there is no eagle on your clothes, but such words are not worth lending an ear to. Only those who hold the eagle in their hearts are my true blood relatives. Kinzo, That's not how DNA works. I now consider it an honor that you were welcomed into the Ushiromiya family." Without saying anything more, Kinzo remained with his back to Natsuhi. However, Natsuhi couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her that she hadn't felt since long ago, when she had just been a child. Natsuhi bowed silently to his back and left the room. Aww, that was sweet. Ah, good timing. It is. I'm going to end this episode on a nice note for once. That was genuinely a really nice conversation. I enjoyed it. Alright, let's find out what this sarcastic woman has to say in the next one. See ya!